What's up, everyone? My name is Isaiah Newsom, and this is the Zay News Podcast, where we talk about all things hoops, whether it's the NBA, college hoops, youth sports, you name it. If it's about basketball, then we talk about it here. And if you are a hoop fan, like I indeed am, then you know it's a great time of year. Today, I think, is March 31st, and we got March Madness going on. We got the NBA regular season wrapping up, and seeding starting to set in. So we're getting a clear picture of how the playoff race is looking and what teams are going to match up with what heading into the playoffs in about 2 or 3 weeks. So without further ado, make sure if you like the content to like, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, leave comments. Let me know if my takes are trash. Let me know if I'm tripping, or let me know where I'm on point. And let's dive into all this basketball stuff. Now, really quickly, let's get the college hoops out of the way because the college basketball scene has been amazing. The March Madness tournament has been amazing. Honestly, my back bracket was busted a long time ago with Houston losing and then Duke losing in the manner that they lost. My bracket is completely crap, and I'm sure most of your guys' are as well. But if you're still doing great, if you got, let's say, all of your Final Four teams still in there, let me know. That would be insane. But maybe I need to lean on you next time for some March Madness picks when next year rolls around. But who knows? Anyways, getting into the NBA, I wanted to start on the West Coast first and foremost, obviously. With me being a Lakers fan, that's why I say obviously, and just kind of run down playoff seeding, what things are looking like, and how I'm thinking things will shake out, in the Western Conference as the playoffs get further along. So OKC over the past month and a half has been playing great basketball. Really since All-Star break, they locked it in again, and mid season, they had some struggles coming off the backs of losing to the Spurs, who was a tough matchup for them in December. Having dudes in and out of the lineup, things kind of waned for them, and waned relatively to OKC standard, right? They started dropping a few. They didn't look like the team that had started the season that was just dominating teams with their defense alone. And now, like I said, since All Star break, they've just looked like the clear cut best team in the NBA. Now, with that being said, they got a team that's been right on their heels in the San Antonio Spurs. And that team, outside of, the first couple months of the season, is also looking like they're neck and neck with OKC. And this has been a fun kind of head to head to watch, right? Not necessarily with them playing together, but just watching these two teams compete for being the two best teams in the NBA, I'd say, across both conferences. Because especially as it pertains to the San Antonio Spurs, you've seen so much growth out of this team over the course of this year, right? When you look at Victor Wembanyama, the strides he's made as being a consistent offensive scorer. Not saying that he hasn't always been that, but someone who um, has worked through some of his weaknesses, right, and is continuing to work through those weaknesses and get better and get more confident as being the offensive predominant force on that Spurs team has been huge for them, right? Let alone the defense, right? We know what we're getting from Vic on defense, but offensively, just the confidence that he's been playing with, the gravity that he has when he steps on the floor as a rim rolling big, as someone who's a legitimate lob threat anytime he's within 8 feet of the basket. And then, not to mention the stuff that he can do on his own, right? The shooting, the putting the ball on the deck, all this sort of stuff that really just takes his game to the next level for being a 7'5" skilled player the way that he is. Has really just allowed that team to grow and blossom into what they are now. And I don't know who I'm picking to come out of the West, to be honest with you. I have no idea who I'm picking to come out of the West because I think the Spurs versus OKC in a series is a very legitimate series because the impact Wemby has on the game, right? What he can do defensively, the way that like, you can just pencil him in to win his matchup every night in that series, right? Offensively, right, like he's going to win his matchup. But on the defensive end of the floor, he's going to have a profound impact. He's going to make things tough on everybody besides Shea, right? Now, he makes Shea will figure things out, right? Shea will be fine. There may be pockets, there may be moments where he's going to struggle a little bit with Wimby at the rim and stuff, but Shea is so good and so talented, he's going to be fine. But the impact Wemby is going to have on the rest of that team is where I see them potentially being just a really tough opponent for OKC. The thing that OKC doesn't really have that, I've seen other teams have where Wimby struggles with is like really great high level tenacious rebounders. I said this earlier in the season after I watched the way that the Knicks beat the Spurs, and I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the Rockets also beat the Spurs earlier in the season. And what both of those teams had in common is they had great offensive rebounders and great physical bigs that OKC just doesn't really have. Isaiah Hardenstein to an extent, but it's hard to play him and Chet at the same time in a series versus the Spurs when you have you know when you have all these shooters and athletic wings on the Spurs. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's one of the primary reasons why OKC struggles, because they don't have a big to really put pressure on Victor in that way, right? Early in the season, the Rockets, they had Steven Adams, relentless on the glass, physical, going to push you around, going to lean on you, going to make you work, and that sort of strength, that sort of leverage really can make Wimby work, because now he has to find a body every time, right? Like he can't roam quite as much, if that makes sense. When you have a body that you have to find and hit when the ball goes up and go clean glass, it makes it harder to over rotate, to be in these positions, to really have a meaningful impact on the help side defense and all that sort of stuff. Because if you do overhelp, right, Steven Adams is going to bury you under the rim and he's going to get that offensive rebound. You know what I'm saying? And he's just going to continue to get, extra possessions for his team. Mitchell Robinson, Karl Anthony Towns, two really high level offensive rebounders, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think the Spurs struggled with um, the the uh, the Knicks as well. At different points of the season. I think the Knicks may have beaten them twice as well. So when you're talking about a OKC Spurs potential Western Conference Finals matchup, I think that is why OKC has struggled quite a bit when coming up against the Spurs, because Wimby just he has the ability to float, to be that 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 staple on defense, that rock on defense when it comes to helping his teammates out, that with other teams, right, he can't do as much if there's a big in there or multiple bigs that really pound that offensive glass and make him work for it. That's one thing I've noticed, and I think I would probably lean towards the Spurs in um in a Western Conference Final series, but there's definitely things that OKC can do, right? Like, just as an example, if OKC just gets, if their role guys get hot and they start hitting shots, the Carusos, the AJ Mitchells, if Jalen comes back, healthy and he's starting to look like himself again, that could be a big addition. I imagine they're going to play Jalen Williams more in that series as opposed to Hardenstein. Like, Hardenstein may not get as many minutes, and they'll just play Jalen Williams to extend the defense. And if Jalen Williams is knocking out shots, then maybe that could be a big crux for them, a big thing that really helps OKC get over the hump against the Spurs. But you'd be asking them to hit shots for a long series, right? I don't think that one's getting over relatively quickly, no matter which way you slice it. You know what I'm saying? So I think right now, I definitely favor both of those two teams to get to the Western Conference Finals. But when you get there, Lord knows what's going to happen. I'd lean the Spurs ever so slightly. No, I'd probably lean the Spurs pretty, not convincingly, but I definitely favor the Spurs, right? I don't want to do that thing halfway. If I say I'm going to lean somewhere, I'm going to lean somewhere. I think just because of matchups, I'd probably lean the Spurs. And I think with the way the seeding shaking out, the Spurs might have an easier path to the finals than OKC might have. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Now, the reason I say the Spurs might have an easier path to the conference finals is just based on matchups. So what we're looking at, right? You got OKC and the Spurs first round. Would probably be the each team's either going to play the Clippers or the Suns, right? I think both of those two teams will likely get into the playoffs, though. Play-in tournament, you never know how things are going to shake out. If Steph gets healthy, he's able to play like the last 5 games of the season. To be honest with you, I don't know why he would, but and they end up beating one of those two teams, then who knows? But ideally, the Clippers and the Suns get into the seventh and eighth seeds, and both of those two teams play, the Spurs and OKC. Whoever ends up playing who, right now it would be, just on seeding, it'd be the Suns playing the Spurs, and it'd be the Clippers playing OKC. Now, I think both of those two teams can make competitive cases for OKC and the Spurs, but by no means do I think it'd be a close series, right? When I say competitive, like a competitive 5 games, right? Like they'd make these teams work. You know what I'm saying? The physicality that the Suns bring could bother the Spurs, right? They could bother Wemby. It's still a case that if you have a strong, smaller guy on Wemby who can get up under him, make it challenging for him to dribble, that he does struggle at times, especially if that jumper's not falling, right? And then you got um, the Clippers who could 4 games have the best player on the court when you're talking about Kawhi, right? So if he matched up against Wemby or Shea, he could be the best player in a game, right? I don't think he'd be the best player over the course of a series against either of those two, but he could outplay Wemby or Shea still in 1, 2, maybe 3 games, right? Who knows? And really make that sucker series. So each of those two teams, I would expect to get past, the Suns or the Clippers in 5, 6 games max, but still those teams would make them work. Now, the second round is where it gets interesting because, um, the Spurs, I think, versus the Lakers, hypothetically, I think, you know, the Spurs are a bad matchup for the Lakers. I'm a Lakers fan through and through, but Spurs are a tough matchup for the Lakers. I could see the Lakers beating them about the same way that they beat the first round team, right? With as great as we're playing, you know, the chemistry's clicking. We got Luka playing MVP level Luka. We got LeBron playing like last year's LeBron, playing at a very high level. Austin Reeves, coming off of that injury, has been playing like himself for the past 2 or 3 weeks, at least more so like himself. And then you got role players really doing what they're doing. I still think that's just a tough series for the Lakers with the athleticism that the Spurs have, right? Athletic teams have really um, been a challenge for the Lakers over the course of this season, even though we've been playing better. And the Spurs just have athletes in excess, and it's just going to be one of those series that I think is tough. Not saying the Lakers can't win, not saying the Lakers can't challenge them, but I think that would be the Lakers versus Spurs would be an easier series for the Spurs than OKC versus Minnesota or Denver. And I know Minnesota and Denver, neither team has been playing great basketball as of late. Anthony Edwards was out of the lineup uh, for the Timberwolves for a couple games. Joker was it still seems like he's playing himself back from that injury a little bit. Just the way he's looked defensively hasn't been great. The way he's even shot the ball offensively hasn't been great. He still does, statistically, he still looks amazing, right? He's still getting 15 boards a game. He'll still get you 10 assists. Excuse me. But his just effect on the game overall, right? It just hasn't looked the same since that injury. And, if they can get everybody healthy, which I think everybody's healthy now, but also playing with a high level of chemistry prior to the playoffs, then I think they're going to be a dangerous team. But just based on how both Minnesota and Denver has looked recently, I think scratch that. Excuse me. Based on how those two, even though those teams haven't looked great recently, I still think those teams match up better with OKC than the Lakers do with the Spurs, right? I think that's fair. I think the familiarity that the Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets have with OKC would make for a tougher series than the Lakers would with the Spurs, right? So for that reason, I think based on how seeding is right now, the Spurs probably have an easier title or an easier path to the conference title than OKC, but um we shall see. And once we get there, we'll see how everything shakes out. But I definitely would lean towards OKC and the Spurs with the way that they've both just been consistent over the course of the season, being in those conference finals. Now, moving on, I want to touch on the Lakers, obviously, because I'm a big Lakers fan. And I got to tip my hat, man. The past month and a half has just been a lot of great basketball for the Lakers, right? You could see a shift in the chemistry. You could see a shift in the focus from guys like Luka, from guys like LeBron, and that has just created a trickle down effect, right? Where Rui's competing consistently, Luke Kennard comes in and gives quality minutes. Marcus Smart, when he's on the floor, he is he's the engine, right? In terms of like defensive intensity, he's the engine, and then not to mention how consistently our centers, both DeAndre Ayton and Jackson Hayes, have been giving high level effort has been amazing to watch, right? The thing with Lakers fans, right? Yes, Lakers fans want to win, and I think this is true for a lot of fan bases, but also they just want to see you compete, right? They just want to see you give your best effort. And for a large part of the season, it didn't feel like the Lakers were doing that. And that has been true for the Lakers since post title 2020, right? It feels like they play in spurts, and it feels like they're not always giving their best effort. And as a fan, that just becomes draining. And then, you make this big trade, but it's still more of the same in that regard, especially this season. But I don't think there's anything but good things you can say about the way the Lakers have made this shift over the past month or so and have just played with such consistent effort. And it's been very fun to watch. The games have been fun to watch. The effort has been fun. And it's evident in their success, right, that they're just playing with a newfound level of effort consistently that's paying dividends for them. So um, I do think the Lakers could make a deep playoff run, especially with the way seeding's laid out right now. But I think in order for them to beat the Spurs, a lot of things would have to go right. Right? So if the playoffs ended today, they'd play the Rockets in the first round. I think so you have the Lakers, Denver, Minnesota, and then Houston all in this four-man race, right? The 3 through 6 race, right? Because the Spurs and OKC have distanced themselves. They're going to be the 1 and the 2 seed. So the Lakers, it's looking like they have the 3 seed locked down. Now they do have a few tough games. They got to play OKC twice still. I think they have the Warriors on their schedule, who if the Warriors are still trying to push to make the play-in, could be a tough game, etc. They play Cleveland in their next game. But it's looking like they should have the 3 seed, right? They put a pretty good gap between them and the next highest team up, which would be Denver. Now, out of the three next teams, if you want to play one of those three teams, right? Ideally, I think we all would say it's the Rockets. The way the Rockets have played over the past 2 months has been just not great, right? Not great offensively. They're extremely inconsistent. They're putting Kevin Durant at 37 in really tough spots. They're asking him to be their primary ball handler, primary playmaker, instead of him being a guy who can just score in spots where I think at this point in his career he'd be the most successful and still produce at a top 10 level if that's all that was being asked of him. But because you're asking Kevin Durant, at 37 with a guy whose first step is slowed down, who's not as explosive as he used to be your primary shot creator for your team, just hasn't been great. And it's not only because it's Kevin Durant being your shot creator, but it's because who he's having to create for, right? You need like prime LeBron, prime Jokic, to make that offense tick. You know what I'm saying? With the supporting cast that there is, because there's just not a lot of shooting, and there's not a lot of variety in what they can do offensively with the players that they have. You know what I'm saying? So ideally, I think the Lakers right now are set up great to win that first round matchup. Now, anything can happen with the playoffs. Physicality gets ramped up, and the Rockets, if not nothing else, they're an extremely physical team who can defend the heck out of the ball. So it could be a very grimy series. The Lakers could walk. It's going to be hard for the Lakers to walk away from that unscathed. And, we'll see if they have juice left in the tank for the next series. But I think ideally, if, you're a fan of the Lakers, because, as a competitor, if you're a player, I don't think you should care who you're going up against. But if you're a fan of the Lakers, this is the best outcome, we could have thought of, with where we were sitting at like a month or two ago, right? I think that's fair to say. So Lakers versus Rockets, I think is a very winnable series for the Lakers. There are some things that would make me nervous, especially the physicality that the Rockets play with, and if they figure some things out offensively, guys start hitting shots, who knows what could happen. But I would definitely edge the Lakers in that series, and I think that would be their best chance of getting past the first round in a matchup versus the Rockets out of those other two teams who are in that pool of, close records with them. Now, let's say they do get past that series and they're facing off against the Spurs in the second round. I do think they could get past the Spurs theoretically, but a lot of things would have to go right. The main one is going to be Luka's going to have to play at a all-time Luka level, right? He's just going to have to play extremely great basketball, especially on the offensive end of the floor, right? We know how Victor Wembanyama can sure things up for a defense, can make things hard on everybody on the court, but specifically, those role players, that second and third star, just being the help side defender he is and whatnot. Luka's going to have to play at an all-time level, and Luka playing at an all-time level is going to free things up for those other guys to get easy shots, the Ruiz, the um, the Austin Reeves, et cetera, DeAndre Ayton, all those sorts of guys, and they just play off that, right? They play off their engine. Now, the reason I say Luka's going to have to play at all-time level is because that's just not a series that I think Austin Reeves is going to play his best basketball in. You know what I'm saying? I think that's going to be a tough series for Austin. Not to say that he won't compete, play hard, and have some good games, but I think there could be a lot of variability in his success, right? He may have one game where he has 25 efficiently. There may be another game where he has 12 and he goes 4 for 14, just because the perimeter defenders that they have and the confidence that those perimeter defenders play with, knowing that they have Wemby on the back line to clean things up. You know what I'm saying? I think that could be a series that Austin struggles in. Now, if Luka can play at that all-time level, if one thing that's going to happen though is, like I just alluded to, he's going to make things easier on his role players. And once guys start hitting shots, I do think the Lakers could offensively produce at the same level as the Spurs. And I do think JJ Redick and that coaching staff is smart enough to make things hard on Wemby specifically, um, in stretches, right? Not for an entire series, but in stretches, right? I think DeAndre Ayton will get the bulk of that matchup, which, when DeAndre Ayton is competing hard and, he's playing like he's been playing the past month and a half, 2 months, however long it's been now. One thing I think he gets not enough credit for is the way he moves his feet as a big, right? Outside of like the best bigs in the league, he moves his feet, stays in front, on switches, on primary defensive assignments, better than, pretty much any big across the league, right? He's very good at moving his feet. He's very good at staying solid, using his base for a big guy. You know what I'm saying? He's really good at that, and I think that could help the Lakers in a series like that. But again, I think it's a tall task. I think matchup wise, just with the athleticism that um, the Spurs have that they can really unleash is going to be hard. And then I think a guy like De'Aaron Fox, who historically has just thrived against the Lakers, is going to be a series where he thrives against the Lakers. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think he's going to have a lot of good moments, even though he tries to be that distributor. We know lineups tighten. Your best players are going to play more. I think his offensive load is going to increase quite a bit. I think he's been very unselfish throughout the season, but I think his offensive load will increase quite a bit. And I think the Lakers are going to have a tough time slowing down a guy like that. I think their efforts are going to be primarily focused on slowing down Wemby, and I think that's a match made in heaven for De'Aaron Fox to just have a great series. You know what I'm saying? So um, I wouldn't pick the Lakers. I got faith that the Lakers can figure some things out, extend that series. I think their offense is good enough to make it a series, a 6-game series. But I think that's a tough matchup for them just in the way their team constructs are, right? And how they've struggled with athletic teams throughout the course of the season, if I'm being 100% honest. And then that leaves, the Oklahoma City Thunder to face off with either Minnesota or Denver. And we've seen both of those series over the past two playoff seasons. And both of those teams give OKC a run for their money. And both of those teams, I think, match up better with OKC than the Lakers do with the Spurs. Now, again, I think the Lakers, with the way that they've been playing, the way they're so dialed in, chemistry wise, coaching wise, their reads, their defensive and offensive schemes, right? I think they definitely could make it a series, but okay, I think Minnesota and Denver are just more familiar with OKC. They're when you play teams a lot, regardless of the differential and records and stuff, you're able to make things more competitive just because familiarity, right? Familiarity, geez, really goes a long way when you're talking about making things competitive. So even though I favor OKC in both of those matchups, I think both of those two teams have a legitimate chance at stretching and extending a series versus those guys, especially, if Anthony Edwards is at his best. Minnesota going into that series is playing good basketball. That they just beat the Denver Nuggets, so they're confident, and vice versa. The Denver Nuggets just get past Minnesota. They're healthy. Peyton Watson is on the court. Aaron Gordon is playing like Aaron Gordon. Defensively, they're able to really compete and play at a high level. And Joker's playing like MVP Joker, right? Both on both sides of the ball, right? That's not to say that he's some defensive stopper, but what it is to say is that when he is at his best, he's we can say a neutral defensive player and not a drain defensively, right? Or not a minus defensively. So that's what I'm seeing, guys. That's what I'm seeing, guys. Um, in terms of play and stuff, we talked about that briefly, but over on the West, I think those top two teams are legitimately the best two teams on that conference's side. I think they should be favored to make it to the Western Conference Finals. I would probably, if one of those two teams were to get upset, I think OKC in the second round could be an upset. I wouldn't call the Spurs beating OKC an upset, right? If that happens in the Western Conference Finals, but um, if one of those teams were to get upset early, I think the most likely chance would probably be OKC in the second round. Hmm. I don't see the Spurs lose. The Lakers could do it. The Lakers could definitely do it. And to be fair, right, maybe I'm giving the Spurs too much credit because they don't have that experience in the playoffs, right? And who knows how things are going to shake when whistles start to change, when things start to get more physical. Usually it benefits the more athletic teams, right? They're moving so fast, they get away with a lot more. But, shots start to look a little bit different. Guys aren't as comfortable. If you haven't played in deep playoff runs, things can look a little bit different. And I think Harrison Barnes and uh, De'Aaron Fox are the only two guys who've, made playoff runs on that roster. So you never know. But right now, I think with the way that the standings are, I would probably think the Spurs have a slightly easier path to get to the conference finals, and then when those two teams face off, we'll see. We'll see how it goes from there. But let's switch it up. Let's switch over to the East, the Eastern side of things, and see what I'm seeing there. The Eastern Conference is much more open to me. I'll be honest with you guys. It's much more open. I'm much less sure about the Eastern side of things than I am on the West side. And that's just a testament to how competitive this season has been, right? You got a team like Charlotte in that 10 spot who's really picked things up since January, who may not get into the playoffs, but if they do, depending on matchups, who knows what could happen, right? Like they could be a really big challenge for teams like Cleveland, teams like the Knicks, even though they likely wouldn't play a team like that first. But still, they could be a really big challenge. They've shown that they can compete with a team like Detroit, right? That was the game the guys got suspended for fighting and all that sort of stuff. So it's just very interesting. And then, you got teams like the 76ers uh, who, just haven't been healthy. But when they are healthy, they do look like they could have been potentially a top 5, 4 seed, a team that's not in the play-in. But you know how that goes. And then you get to the top, right, where you got Detroit, who will have Cade just coming back off that collapsed lung. At least that's the hope, right, before the playoffs. Um, what do they look like in the playoffs this season, especially if Cade isn't 100% or he's still trying to play his way back into shape. Team like Boston has Jason Tatum coming back and trying to play his way back into form. I don't think, no matter, when Jason Tatum came back, right, just on the timeline, he wasn't going to get back to his self this season, right? I just think that's just it's hard when you're coming back from an injury like that, right? Like I dislocated my ankle last year. almost a year ago today, and I still don't feel like myself all the time. Like I've had moments, spurts where I feel like myself, and then there's other days where it's just like, ah man, I'm just not, And it's that with injuries that are that impactful, right? That are that big that take that much time to heal because you get deconditioned a little bit, your confidence wanes a little bit, and slowly but surely you chip away at it. You start to find sweet spots. You start to find spots that you're comfortable again, and you start to feel like yourself again. But that just takes time and that takes reps, right? That takes time and that takes reps. And I don't think no matter what the scenario was, he wasn't going to get enough reps in this year to be all the way 100% Jason Tatum. And that's okay though. Like the reason I say that is because I don't necessarily think they need Jason Tatum to be 100% Jason Tatum to make it out the East. Now, in order to beat one of those juggernauts in the West, I wouldn't be as confident that they don't need 100% Jason Tatum, but at least to make it out the East, I think Jason Tatum at 85%, you know, is enough to help them. Obviously in the context of Jaylen Brown's playing at a first team All NBA level. You got Derek White who's been playing great, Peyton Pritchard who's been playing great. Their centers who have been playing great, and now you got um, Nicola coming off the bench for them, all that sort of stuff, and they have a pretty decent roster who's been playing really good basketball. So I think right now, if I had to edge a team, I would probably edge Boston. I think that's where I'm at with it. I would probably edge Boston to come out of the East if I had to choose today. But I still feel like the East is pretty wide open. I still think a series between them and the Knicks would be a very competitive series. I think that's a series tailor made for Cat to have a really good series, even though, they haven't leaned on Cat quite as much offensively this season. I think that's a series where he could play well just based off matchups. Um, so we'll see how things shake out, but I would edge Boston. The Knicks are interesting to me because I think the Knicks, they're a deep playoff run for them is going to depend again heavily on matchups because I think just their roster configuration in its nature is just a little bit flawed because your two best offensive players are your two worst defensive players, and they're not just your worst defensive players because it's normal for your high producing offensive talent to not be as dialed in on defense. But what's not normal is the caliber of defenders that they are, which is pretty low right now. Obviously, Cat can do a little bit because he's a big who can rebound the ball, who can contest shots at the rim at times. But there's just lapses. He fouls a lot. He's not always in the right position. He can't move his feet great, which you wouldn't expect a footer to necessarily do that. But still, you know what I'm saying. Still, and then you got Jaylen who just based on his size, based on a lot of things working for him, he's just not the greatest defender. So it's tricky. I think a lot of that would be based on matchups for them. Like I think a Knicks team could get past Cleveland, um, but when you're talking about teams like Detroit, when you're talking about things like teams like Boston, when you're talking about a team like Charlotte, who's going to make you defend, I don't know, right? Like I don't know how that looks, but we shall see. We shall see. I would edge Boston coming out. I think depending on how Cade Cunningham comes back, I still do like Detroit just because the caliber of defense that Detroit can unleash on teams, and this is why they just played a competitive game with OKC yesterday without their best player. This is why they beat the Lakers 2 weeks ago. This is why their team has stayed afloat in the absence of Cade, just because that defense is such a juggernaut. Um, but they need Cade at 100% just with how fragile their offense is in order to come out of the East for sure. I think I think if their defense is really dialed in, they could beat a team like Cleveland in the second round. Um, but man, I think it'd be tough. I think it'd be tough because James Harden has been playing such high level basketball. Donovan Mitchell's been playing at such a high level. When the playoffs come, games slow down. Having guys like Donovan, having guys like James who can really just set your team up in the half court matters so much. And production wise, like James isn't far off this season at 36 from what Cade is. Now Cade's better player, better defender, But offensively, as like the driver of an offense, production wise, James isn't that far off still at age 36. You know what I'm saying? And you have that plus Donovan Mitchell. You have that plus Sam Merrill. You have that plus Evan Mobley, plus Jared Allen rolling to the rim, who James is going to feast off of. And now with James on the court, Donovan Mitchell can be what he is, which is an electric scorer. If everything's dialed in, I think that's a tough matchup for Detroit, especially if Cade isn't 100%. I could see that series going deep just because I think their defense will win them a couple games in a playoff series. But depending on if Cade is, 85, 90% as opposed to 100%, I would favor Cleveland. And I'll imagine, right? He'll probably have one playoff series under his belt before matching up with Cleveland, but I would imagine even with that playoff series, he's still going to be playing his way back a little bit. You know what I'm saying? And because of that, I would probably edge Cleveland. With the way seeding is today, it could change a little bit, right? Cleveland could bounce up to that third seed theoretically. I think the top four seeds are pretty much locked with where they're at right now in terms of those are going to be the top four seeds. But, 2, 3, 4 could change a little bit. This Boston, if they dropped a couple games, they could drop down to 3. Um, Knicks could move up to 2. Cleveland could probably move up to 3, but they probably couldn't move up to 2. So we'll see how things lay out there, but um, it'll be interesting. So let me think about this for a second. I would favor Cleveland to beat Detroit if Cade isn't 100%, and I don't think he's going to be 100%. I would probably favor Boston to beat the Knicks this season. I know I know the Knicks beat Boston last year, and the Celtics didn't play great in that series. Um, they fell in love with that three ball. I think their team construct is a little bit different because their best player is different this season, right? Jaylen Brown is absolutely their best player this season. And because of that, he gets to play to his strengths a little bit more, and there's a little bit less variability in their offensive production, right? Meaning Jaylen Brown's more at the mid range, more at the rim. There's a little bit less variability with that, right? You're not going to have as wide of swings where you guys just can't buy a three versus you're hitting all your threes. And Boston, the past couple seasons prior to Jason Tatum's injury, was very much that, right? Now, they were so good. They're usually hitting shots. They're usually fine offensively, statistically, all that sort of stuff. The way Mazzulla sets up his offense, it usually worked out, right? But you get into these playoff series, and there's evidence that it didn't always. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Now, with Jaylen Brown, I would suspect with the way that he plays and the shot diet that he has, that's less likely to happen. And because of that, I would favor them in a series versus the Knicks this season because he's a little bit more reliable of a driver and a mid-range shooter. Not necessarily in making them, but just getting them off, right? So I would favor Boston to beat the Knicks, and then in a series of the Knicks versus Cleveland, I would favor Boston in that series as well. But I think that's it for me, guys. I think I went over what I wanted to go over today. So just to cap it all off, if you like the content today, make sure you like, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, like I always say. Leave a comment. Tell me where I'm tripping. Tell me where you think the Lakers are going to beat the Spurs, or you think Denver is going to crush OKC in a series, because by that time they're going to have everything really dialed in. And if this Denver team wasn't dealing with injuries, they'd be a top 2 seed anyway. Whatever the case may be, let me know where I'm tripping. Let me know where I'm on point. Let's have a discussion. Let's continue to grow this channel because we've been growing really amazingly this year, right? We're almost to 100 subscribers. That's amazing. That's amazing. For like the first 6 months to a year, I was getting like no subscribers. Now I'm almost to 100. I think that's an amazing milestone, and I'm very blessed and happy to see the channel growing in that way. Even if it's one person every week, right? That's a huge compliment just to the consistency we try to show on this page and posting, something every day. So again, if you like the content, make sure to like, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend. Leave me a comment, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue to grow this channel and continue to, grow the game we love, which is basketball.